Hi everyone, my name is Amir Nuriala. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer here at CallSign, and I'm here to talk to you at the Gartner conference on the subject of do new technologies allow you to consider security, risk, and UX in your IAM strategy. I just want to set the scene a little bit before I then introduce my Grant, who I'm having a conversation with on this topic. So we are now in a world post-COVID where digital transformation has been massively accelerated. Here at CallSign, we recently did a survey where 80% of respondents said they shop online, and fewer than 50% would rather buy from a physical store. So across both banking and the merchant space, we are seeing an acceleration of digital adoption of the channel. With this shift to online, we're hitting an identity challenge, as customers now want to see seamless experiences in terms of user journeys, but also how their information which they're sharing is secured. And if anyone is like myself and frequently goes onto Twitter, I am seeing people writing comments like, I'm going to choose my bank going forward from the App Store rating. These are comments you would have never ever heard a few years ago. So we've seen a massive impact from COVID, but that doesn't mean all is lost. There's a lot of new technologies out there, and we believe we're at a kind of a crux point where organizations can consider the optimal digital strategy and digital journey while also thinking about their IAM strategies, making sure they are optimal as well. As such, I'm here to talk with Niven, who is the head of Group Digital at Banque Saudi Fransi. Most of you in the region will know Grant well. He has initially in the UK and Europe been advising lots of clients on specifically this type of digital transformation. The last few years he's been doing it in the Middle East, and I think it's about a year now, Grant, that you were actually brought in-house by Banque Saudi Fransi to help them do their digital transformation.
Yes, indeed, and thank you, Amir. Been working in Saudi Arabia now for just over a year. Interestingly, joined the bank bang in the middle of COVID really kicking off. So it's been a high octane period trying to really shore up some of the challenges that we globally we've seen, but ultimately, how do we serve customers in a pandemic environment, and how do we really kind of leverage digital securely to support that overall ambition of changing the way we engage with all segments in a very difficult time. Your point around working in multiple markets. So I've spent a lot of my career based out of the UK, where my home is in Edinburgh, but working with a lot of the big UK-centered banks, and then over the last 7 years, working across the Middle East, North Africa region, based out of the UAE. So it's been an interesting time, and I think a very hot topic. There's a lot happening in this space, and really keen to kind of have a discussion with you, and grateful for the opportunity to do so.
No, thank you so much for joining us. So one thing I'm just going to say up front, Grant, please don't give away any secrets. We don't want you to reveal, what you've been brought in to do at Banque Saudi Fransi in terms of the secret source of that optimal journey. So let's keep it a bit more high level and industry wide, and like you just shared with everyone, you do have very broad experience and can talk about what's happening in the market as a whole. So with that in mind, we've already set the scene. 2020 has seen a huge rise in digital working. Remote working now it's become the norm, remote banking, remote purchasing. Grant, what effect has this had in the industry, particularly around the topic we're here to discuss today, security and then user or customer experience?
Well, I think we've been evolving in the region and across the world to everyone's always on with their smart devices, right? And by nature, the transformation we see in the banking sector is our customer base, be it a retail client or a corporate client or private, all the different segments we're operating with, expect to have that digital experience. What the pandemic's done is accentuate that even more. It's highlighted gaps in terms of how the banks are serving, and actually deficiencies in terms of the propositions we've got. But it's also accelerated how digital and secure digital can be used to enable really providing world-class capability. For me, what happened going back to February, March last year was, I guess, from an internal perspective, a lot of large organizations at first really wrestled with how do they enable their workforce to continue operating and operating in a secure way. So we had huge swathes of people who could no longer physically come to an office. We had to equip those people to be securely operating away from maybe some of their more traditional desktop environment and operating from home through VPNs, through multiple devices. And that in itself created quite a big challenge for a lot of organizations. And I know in particular, it doesn't matter where you were in terms of location, gearing yourselves up to securely tool up the workforce was a huge feat. I think that in itself was a big accomplishment, and technology has been a major enabler to doing that. And actually, we're never going to go back now. I think we globally see lots of organizations seeing how through smart working, through collaboration technologies, through leveraging a lot of the ways of working through Agile, we can actually do things from a different location. We don't have to be together. And we'll maybe drill into this a bit further. But ultimately as well, I think what we've seen around the security aspect of that is actually a need for security teams working with digital, like my organization, and IT to really change the way we operate. And there's been a lot of work, huge kind of big public announcements around fraud, certainly accelerated throughout the market. Phishing has been something we've been increasingly worried about in terms of, we've got all these remote users, how we securely equipping them, but equally how we protecting them from their home environment. And as people come back into the office, how do we, if we're giving them new ways to work, how do we make sure they're equipped to deal with that? But so there's been a lot of focus around hardening of devices, risk assessment, making sure we're elevating our security monitoring, and also making people aware of what the risks are. So educating people. So that's one side. But I think the other side of this is in the world of being digital, we're continually striving to give great experiences to our customers. We want to make it easy for them to engage with us. We don't want to throw in extra kind of steps in terms of how they're engaging through their smartphone, for example, in terms of authentication. So we're looking to really tap into technologies and new enhanced ways around designing UX in terms of how they can engage. I think there's a couple kind of big themes starting to come through as the innovations come through, and we look at ways to kind of navigate around a pandemic world and new ways of working. We're also seeing kind of the innovation also something we want to tap into to help that experience. So virtual reality in terms of capabilities, we're seeing voice UI. How do we build that into our proposition? How do we look at augmented reality in terms of the proposition and enhancing how people can visualize? If they physically can't go somewhere, how can we bring it to them? And I think within that as well, there's obviously other aspects such as health. So the whole health agenda globally, be it banking or other sectors, has become very important to people. So giving people digital health services, even as a bank, is something we'd love to explore and further in terms of how can we use these technologies to enable it. So there's so many different facets around how do you make it work, but I think the art is how do you give things to people simply and securely so that they're engaged. So a big topic, and I know we'll drill into this a bit further.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. And you've given me probably 3 or 4 more questions to ask. I'm not sure which to start with. I'll tell you what, why don't I do another statistical one? So one of the things we've seen on the CallSign side is statistics such as every second of latency in a digital user journey leads to 7% drop-off rate. So that kind of, how much friction is there in getting someone being able to log in, whether it's an employee or a customer, but getting someone to log in and do what they want, that becoming something of concern for the first time. So it's not just about how secure, but how easy, like you said, simply as well, how easy it is for them to do it. Another statistic we saw is around privacy, and it's just as important around that. And 34% of people felt comfortable sharing personal details with companies online. So it does seem like there's still a bit of a mistrust that, like you said, there's phishing attacks, there might be hacks, that kind of thing. So how do you build that trust with customers as well? So I guess my first question to you is, you set the scene quite beautifully across what COVID has done, all the technologies out there, and how someone in a senior position like yourself is thinking of adopting them to transform the bank. But when you hear statistics like every second of latency leads to 7% drop-off rate, i.e. if someone wants to log in and make a payment and it just takes 10 seconds to do it, you're going to lose those people, and eventually they're probably going to change bank or find different ways to make payments. Are you seeing those kind of discussions happening now? And when you're talking about the user journey, when you're talking about digital, it's no longer just about marketing. It's a wider discussion where you're discussing authentication and security as well. Is that something that has changed for yourself?
Yeah, very much so. So I think the whole user journey and designing our digital experiences around the customer to make them as seamless as possible is probably the number one priority for the industry just now. There's lots of bad experiences out there, so we're all striving to change that. And I think through technology, but actually through different parts of an organization collaborating together to really put our heads into how can we make this better is one of the key things that needs to happen. And the first thing is actually primary research, and organizations who are hugely successful in this area are having those kind of integrated journeys actually sit with their clients and really work out what the pain points are. And I think that's number one. If you do that right, you do your primary research, you engage with your customer base, understand what they really need, then you can then relook at your internal and also external processes to integrate that. And I think a good example is, for any bank, your onboarding experience digitally. So if that is minimal in terms of the number of clicks through your mobile device, and you can do that relatively easily and quickly, and you see all the stats coming out from various different kind of social media groups around the least number of clicks to onboard and open a bank account. And we all strive to be up there, but ultimately some of those can be slightly deceiving, because you get to a certain point, you're onboarded, but actually you can't do a great deal once you're there until you go through further steps. But that's a good example of it's moving beyond digital and security. We're actually, you need to start engaging with compliance, risk, various and other functions, once you've really understood what the customer needs, to then work at ways, how do you collaborate internally as an organization, as a bank, within those functions to minimize the amount of friction throughout that digital process. But actually, how can you leverage other third parties, which again brings out the security aspect around how securely can we engage with a third party who can help with credit checking, for example. That in itself, if it's a regulated body, can alleviate a number of steps for us. So certainly us and many other banks are looking at that ecosystem of partners, both within the organization and externally, bringing those together in an integrated digital journey. And that's the secret sauce to providing what seems to the customer a very simple process. Actually, in the back end, there's a huge amount going on to make that happen. And I think that's probably been number one priority for me and our teams. And certainly I know across the industry around getting that right. Now that's obviously just onboarding, but once you go through the various different steps of a journey in terms of customers engaging with the platform and looking to drill down on services and get support and advice, you obviously need to take that same mentality as you go through that whole life cycle. So I think the biggest shift change we're seeing is the transition from your organization, your technology team, your kind of in-house functions dealing with the client, but actually how do we integrate and operate with a multitude of other partners in a particular set of kind of systems in a country and potentially globally, to make that experience even better. And that's where security now is becoming ever more important, around how do you interface, how do you create an environment that through APIs we can actually kind of collaborate much more effectively. And that's a bigger topic around the likes of open banking. How do you leverage the open banking frameworks that are being deployed to support that journey?
Yeah, you've actually given me massive flashbacks there. I remember a couple of years ago when I was the COO of Oakenhoff Bank, and we would be set challenges like increase the percentage of customers that you can fully automated digital onboard. So the fully automated account opening process. And it wasn't something that we could solve as a as a technology function. I mean, I was a COO, so I had tech, I had ops, I had product, etc. But I had to bring in compliance in that room because we had to look at the regulation and interpretation and just see what is that correct balance of being compliant, being secure, and having the best journey. It's not something one group in isolation can decide. So you've given me I don't know if it's a happy flashback or a not happy one, but I appreciate you doing that. So thank you. But delving a bit deeper, so on that topic of how the technologies can help you do this and do it in an optimal way, one of the things that Courseline, we're very interested in always is the discussion of behavioral biometrics as a technology topic. So in Europe, that's become mandated through regulations like the strong customer authentication, the SCA regulation. It's not something that's mandated in Saudi or the kind of GCC or the MENA wider region. Are you looking proactively at those kind of technologies and seeing how they can enhance your journeys as well?
Very much so. I think, again, as the world has shifted to mobile online channels first versus traditional, the bulk of fraud attempts, which could have been tackled with some more, I guess, more traditional rule-based engines and statistical models, it's just not able to keep up anymore, right? And as the globe pushes increasingly towards mobile first for everything and digital experiences, in the financial services world, we're going to need to tackle things a different way to be able to deal with the size and severity of the potential fraud risk to protect the customers. So the only way forward is, for me, is the industry has to adopt artificial intelligence, has to look at new ways around behavioral biometrics in terms of how we actually proactively look at how an individual operates using their device. And there's so much technology sitting in this little gadget that actually can detect the movement of your eye, the way you move your hand, the way you hold your phone. And if these things could be actually and can be measured into some of the traditional processes you've got, and you use that capability to add more layers of supervision and authentication for the user. One, it doesn't impact the customer experience, so they still have a great experience, but actually there's an extra layer going on in the background that they're probably not aware of, that's actually identifying, is it really the customer who's using that device, or is it the customer who's trying to make that transaction, which can advise the bank that there's potentially a fraud risk here. So I know for me personally, I'd be delighted to know if my organization was using that I would do my banking with, because it's going to give an extra layer of trust and comfort.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been told we've got 2 minutes. So I'm going to try and squeeze in one more question if I can, Grant. We've kind of broached this topic, but if it's okay, I'm just going to ask you directly. We've said this is no longer a decision that can be done in isolation. You need compliance, you need technology, you need someone like yourself, but you also need the CISO, and you also need the head of compliance, etc., to be in a room and agree the way forward. Was that something that relationship-wise and just kind of working practice was already in place, or is that something as part of digital transformation that you've implemented to get this kind of work in?
Yeah, look, I think a lot of organizations still operate in silos, and actually to be truly digital, there needs to be new ways of working to get these cross-functional teams together. So in a number of organizations I've worked in, that's been the first big step change, is culturally people starting to think about how they change the way they work, not only to adopt things like agile and new methodologies and delivery and design thinking, but actually just physically to understand working together, be it on a VC screen or actually physically in a room when we can do it, to actually work together on a combined challenge. And actually a technologist understanding what the front end business team is trying to achieve, and compliance and other kind of support functions understanding that as well, is actually the only way forward to actually making some of these fundamental changes, because there's the ripple effect in any organization. To make that change for the customer, you actually have to change a whole load of back end and potential policy process within the organization. And actually I feel personally that having a kind of cross-functional team approach, and you can call it whatever you want, be it a digital factory, where people come together to address particular major issues or deliver missions and projects. That approach in getting those teams working in a different way is the way you get understanding up, and actually you get people really kind of working out. There's always going to be barriers to solving the particular issue, so getting that co-creation is critical. So
fantastic.
That in itself is probably another big topic.
Yeah, no, it is, and I'm sorry to pose it on such a tough question, but thank you so much for answering that and all of my other questions. I think it's quite clear that we now need to think about UX security and privacy as part of a broader IAM strategy. The lines are all being blurred, as you've mentioned, and that silo has to be broken as part of digital transformation. I think if anyone's interested in diving a bit more, I'd highly recommend watching David Matthews' You've Got a Cloud Security All Wrong presentation, which is going to delve into these kind of details. Please feel free to connect to myself on LinkedIn. I'm sure Grant will nod and say he's okay with that. And thank you all for your attention and time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Amir.